A torn envelope, a humble man, and a will that shook the elite of Highland Park. Don't miss this video. What seemed like a simple delivery turned into the revelation of a multi-million-dollar inheritance. And what that farmer heard in that room will give you goosebumps. Subscribe to the channel and find out who really inherited the Montgomery Empire. The scorching sun of Highland Park, the most exclusive neighborhood in Dallas, fell relentlessly upon George Miller as he walked with timid steps through the Summit Shopping Plaza. His rough hands, weathered by years of work in the fields, held a simple canvas bag worn by time. At 68, George was completely out of place in that environment of luxury and ostentation. The international designer stores, high-end restaurants, and exclusive jewelry shops formed a world foreign to him. However, there he was, fulfilling the last wish of his compadre Jack, who had asked him before departing to a better life to personally deliver that canvas bag to a notary in the city. "I only trust you, George," Jack had told him weakly from his deathbed. "Promise me that no one but you will take this to Attorney Owens in Highland Park." George had traveled from his small ranch in Oklahoma to Dallas without imagining what awaited him. He wore his best shirt, a white piece with typical embroidery, his newest pair of jeans and his leather boots, worn but well polished. Even so, the contemptuous glances of the shopping center's customers followed him with every step. "Could it be here?" he muttered to himself, consulting for the umpteenth time the address written on a wrinkled piece of paper. The notary's office had to be somewhere in that labyrinth of glass and marble. At that moment, a tall man in an impeccable suit and gold watch stopped in front of him, blocking his path. It was Edward Vance, owner of Vance Investments, one of the most powerful and feared businessmen in the city. "Are you lost, old man?" he asked with a biting tone, loud enough for several passers-by to turn and look. "The service entrance is on the other side. This is no place for people like you." George lowered his gaze, instinctively pressing the canvas bag against his chest. "Excuse me, sir, I'm just looking for Attorney Owens's office," he responded with a soft but dignified voice. Edward let out a laugh and looked around, seeking approval from the spectators. "Do you hear that, Attorney Owens?" he mocked. "And what business could someone like you have with one of the most important notaries in Texas?" George tried to dodge him, but Edward grabbed him firmly by the shoulder. "What are you carrying there with such care, farmer?" "Your life savings," continued Edward, pointing to the canvas bag. "How much could it be? A few $1,000s?" "Please, sir, I'm in a hurry," insisted George, trying to free himself. Among the spectators, a young woman with black hair and large brown eyes observed the scene with indignation. It was Valerie Miller, George's granddaughter, who worked as a sales associate in one of the exclusive boutiques in the shopping center. She had gotten that job to help pay for the university where she studied business administration, and now, paralyzed by surprise, she watched as her grandfather was humiliated. "That's enough," she finally shouted, advancing toward them. "Leave him alone!" Edward looked her up and down, recognizing her. Well, the little salesgirl from Elegance Boutique," he said with a contemptuous smile. "Do you know this gentleman?" "He's my grandfather," she responded with pride, "and I demand that you respect him." Edward's smile widened, cruel. "Now, I understand everything. Grandpa comes to visit his little granddaughter who's playing at being important in Highland Park," he mocked. "How touching. Surely he's brought your lunch in that mysterious bag." In a quick and unexpected movement, Edward snatched the bag from George's hands and tore it in half. The contents fell to the floor, some sandwiches wrapped in a cloth, a small thermos, and among them, a yellowish envelope sealed with red wax. Silence took over the place. Edward, still laughing, picked up the envelope. "What do we have here? A love letter," he said, turning the envelope between his fingers. But his smile froze when he saw the seal imprinted in the wax. It was the coat of arms of the Montgomery family, one of the oldest and most powerful dynasties in Texas. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice now tense and serious. Before George could respond, an authoritative voice resonated in the hallway. "Mr. George Miller, you finally arrived. We've been waiting for you." A middle-aged man with glasses and a formal suit approached them. It was Attorney Owens. "I see you've already met Mr. Vance," said the notary, looking disapprovingly at the mess on the floor. Mr. Vance, would you be so kind as to return the envelope to Mr. Miller? It's a legal document of utmost importance. Edward, disconcerted, handed the envelope to the notary, who examined it quickly to ensure the seal was intact. Perfect, said Attorney Owens. Mr. Miller, please accompany me to my office. It's time to read Count Montgomery's will. Will? Stammered Edward, turning pale. What does this man have to do with Count Montgomery? The notary smiled enigmatically. That, Mr. Vance, we will know very soon. But I can tell you in advance that Mr. George Miller is the main beneficiary of the Count's will, who passed away a month ago at his estate in Oklahoma. Murmurs spread throughout the plaza. Valerie looked at her grandfather with amazement. Grandpa, is that true? She asked quietly. George nodded slowly. Your great-grandfather was the brother of the Count's father, he explained simply. Jack and I grew up together before his family moved to the city. We reconnected a few years ago when he came back to buy land near our ranch. Attorney Owens cleared his throat discreetly. If you'll allow me, we have important matters to attend to, he said, guiding George and Valerie toward the elevators. The reading of the will is scheduled for 15 minutes from now, and there are several interested parties waiting. As they walked away, Edward Vance remained motionless, his face a mask of disbelief. The man he had just publicly humiliated, whom he had treated as a nobody, was now the heir to the Montgomery fortune, one of the largest in Texas, with estates, hotels, and companies valued at billions of dollars. Who was really poor there? The question hung in the air as the elevator doors closed, taking George toward a destiny that would change his life forever. Attorney Owens's office occupied the entire top floor of the corporate building. The windows offered a panoramic view of Highland Park and the majestic City Park. George and Valerie were led to a conference room where several people waited impatiently. Upon entering, all eyes turned to them with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Let me introduce you to Mr. George Miller, announced Attorney Owens with a solemn voice, the main beneficiary of Count Jack Montgomery's will. Among those present was Sophie Montgomery, the Count's niece, an elegant 50-year-old woman who did not hide her disgust. This must be a joke, she protested, rising from her seat. This farmer will inherit my uncle's fortune. It's absurd. Attorneys Farr. Owens maintained his composure. Mrs. Montgomery, I assure you everything is in order. The Count left very precise instructions. Next to her, a young man in an impeccable suit and serious expression observed the scene. It was Alexander Montgomery, Sophie's son and the Count's great-nephew. Mom, please, he said with a calm voice. Let's allow the attorney to explain the situation. Sophie sat down, shooting piercing glances at George, who remained standing by the door, visibly uncomfortable in that luxurious environment. Attorney Owens took a seat at the head of the table and opened a folder. I will proceed to read the will of Count Jack Montgomery Ruiz, he announced, putting on his reading glasses. As the notary read the document, the room sank into an increasingly tense silence. Count Montgomery had left the majority of his fortune, including the Paradise and St. Christopher estates in Oklahoma, as well as shares in luxury hotels and agricultural businesses, to his childhood friend, George Miller. To my dear friend George, read the notary, I leave these assets not only because of our lifelong friendship, but because he represents the values I have always admired: honesty, hard work, and loyalty. Values that unfortunately I have not found in my own family. Sophie turned pale at these words, while Alexander maintained his impenetrable expression. This is unacceptable, interrupted a voice from the door. Edward Vance had silently entered, and now advanced toward the table with a determined step. What are you doing here, Mr. Vance? Asked Attorney Owens severely. This is a private meeting. I have every right to be present, responded Edward arrogantly. My company, Vance Investments, has pending contracts with the Count's estates, contracts that represent millions of dollars. George, who until then had remained quiet, took a step forward. Mr. Vance, he said with a calm but firm voice, if I remember correctly, you humiliated me less than an hour ago. You treated me as if I were less than nothing. And now you want To discuss business with me? A murmur swept through the room. Valerie observed her grandfather with a mixture of pride and amazement. She had never seen him speak with such authority. Edward Vance, unaccustomed to being confronted, was momentarily speechless. "Mr. Miller," intervened Attorney Owens, "in addition to the properties, the Count left a personal letter for you." He handed him a sealed envelope that George opened carefully. His eyes scanned the lines handwritten by his old friend, and a tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "My dear friend Jack," he murmured, "always so generous." Sophie Montgomery rose abruptly. "This won't stand," she exclaimed. "We will contest." "This will. My uncle was not in his right mind." "I assure you, Mrs. Montgomery," responded Attorney Owens, "that the Count was in full possession of his mental faculties when he drafted this document. We have medical certificates that confirm this, as well as witnesses." Alexander, who had remained silent, approached George. "Mr. Miller," he said with a serene voice, "I don't intend to question my great-uncle's wishes. However, I would like to speak with you in private, if possible." Valerie took a step toward her grandfather. "My grandfather has nothing to discuss in private," she responded firmly. "Anything you want to tell him, you can say in front of everyone." Alexander smiled, a gesture that softened his severe features. "I just want to properly introduce myself," he explained. "My great-uncle talked a lot about you, Mr. Miller. He said you were the most honorable man he had ever known." The atmosphere in the room subtly changed. The initial tension gave way to cautious curiosity. George, however, seemed oblivious to all of it. His thoughts were with his friend Jack and the memories of their shared youth. "My grandfather needs to rest," intervened Valerie. "It's been a very intense day for him." Attorney Owens nodded. "Of course. In fact, the Count anticipated this situation and left instructions for a suite to be prepared at the Montgomery Hotel for Mr. Miller and his family." Edward Vance, who had been observing the scene with growing frustration, saw an opportunity. "Mr. Miller," he said, trying to adopt a friendly tone, "allow me to offer you my car and my driver to take you to the hotel. It's the least I can do after this morning's misunderstanding." Valerie was about to reject the offer when her grandfather surprised her. "I accept your offer, Mr. Vance," said George, "and I also accept speaking with young Alexander. But not today. Today I need to process everything that has happened." Edward smiled triumphantly, while Alexander bowed his head in respect. "As you wish, Mr. Miller," responded Alexander. They left the room. Sophie Montgomery stopped them with a final warning. "This isn't over," she said with an icy voice. "The Montgomerys will not allow a nobody to take what is rightfully ours." George looked her directly in the eyes. "Ma'am, your uncle was my friend. I'm not interested in his fortune or his properties. I only fulfilled my promise to bring that envelope." "Then you'll renounce the inheritance?" asked Sophie, with a glimmer of hope. George smiled enigmatically. "I didn't say that. I said I'm not interested in the fortune. What I'll do with it is my business." They left the building into the dazzling light of the city afternoon. Edward Vance's driver waited next to a luxurious black car. "Grandpa," whispered Valerie as they walked, "do you trust this man after how he treated you?" George gently squeezed his granddaughter's hand. "Honey, at my age I've learned that sometimes it's better to keep your enemies close. Besides," he added with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes, "I think your old grandfather has a few surprises up his sleeve." Valerie didn't fully understand what her grandfather meant, but something in his tone reassured her. As they got into the car, they didn't notice that Alexander Montgomery was watching them from the entrance of the building with an indecipherable expression on his face. 3 days had passed since the reading of the will. The Montgomery Hotel, an architectural jewel in the heart of Highland Park, had become the temporary home of George and Valerie. The presidential suite, with its designer furniture and original works of art, dramatically contrasted with the simple adobe house in Oklahoma where George had lived all his life. That morning, as they had breakfast on the private terrace overlooking the Dallas skyline, Valerie noticed that her grandfather seemed especially thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" "About Grandpa?" she asked, serving him more coffee. George contemplated the city that stretched out before them, a vibrant and contradictory metropolis. "I'm thinking about Jack, about our childhood together. he responded nostalgically, and about how strange fate is. He, born with a silver spoon, me, a farmer's son, and now you're one of the richest men in Texas, completed Valerie. How do you feel about that? George smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes accentuated. Money doesn't change who I am, honey. It only changes what I can do. The suite's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. It was the hotel manager, informing them that Edward Vance and Alexander Montgomery were requesting to see them. Tell them to come up, indicated George, to Valerie's surprise. Are you sure? She asked, concerned. That man Vance publicly humiliated you, and now he wants to redeem himself, responded George calmly. Let's let him try. Minutes later, Edward Vance entered the suite with an expensive bouquet of flowers and a box of Cuban cigars. Behind him, Alexander Montgomery wore a serious expression and carried a leather briefcase. Mr. Miller, what a pleasure to see you, greeted Edward with exaggerated cordiality. I hope you're enjoying your stay. Mr. Vance, responded George, without rising from his chair. To what do I owe the honor of your visit? Edward cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable under the old man's direct gaze. You see, Mr. Miller, I've been reflecting on our unfortunate initial encounter, and I'd like to offer you my most sincere apologies, he said, extending the flowers and cigars. Also, I'd like to talk to you about an extraordinary business opportunity. George accepted the gifts with a courteous but distant gesture. I'm listening. Edward smiled, taking a seat without being invited. As you may know, my company, Vance Investments, has been developing a luxury tourist project on the Oklahoma coast, he explained. A complex that will revolutionize tourism in the region. And what does that have to do with me? Asked George. Well, it turns out that Paradise Estate, which is now yours, borders the land we need to complete the project, explained Edward. I'm willing to offer you a considerable sum for that land. Let's say $50 million? Valerie, who had remained silent, couldn't contain an exclamation of surprise. It was an immense sum. George, however, didn't seem impressed. Mr. Vance, that land has belonged to the Montgomery family for generations. It has historical and sentimental value. 100 million, then, countered Edward with a flash of desperation in his eyes. That's my final offer. Alexander Montgomery, who until then had remained quiet, stepped forward. Mr. Miller, if I may intervene, he said with a serene voice. I believe there's something you should know before considering any offer from Mr. Vance. Edward shot him a piercing look. I don't see how your intervention can help, Montgomery, he spat. This is between Mr. Miller and me. Alexander ignored the comment and opened his briefcase, extracting a folder. Mr. Miller, my great-uncle, confided certain information to me shortly before his passing, he explained. Information that concerns Mr. Vance and his true intentions with the Paradise Estate lands. Edward turned pale. What the hell are you talking about? He stammered. Alexander extended the folder toward George. Vance Investments is on the verge of bankruptcy, he revealed. Edward has mortgaged all his properties to finance his tourist project, but the foreign investors withdrew 3 months ago. He desperately needs the Paradise Estate lands because recent geological studies have discovered that beneath them lies one of the largest and purest aquifers in America. A tense silence invaded the room. Valerie looked alternately at Edward and Alexander, processing the revelation. That's absurd, protested Edward, standing up. You're inventing lies to sabotage my business. George calmly examined the documents in the folder. Financial reports, geological studies, leaked emails. The water, he finally murmured. It has always been the most valuable treasure of that land. Jack knew it. Edward, seeing his plan crumbling, changed strategies. 200 million, he offered desperately. My entire company in exchange for that land. George closed the folder and looked directly at Edward. Mr. Vance, I will not sell Paradise Estate. Not for 200 million, not for 2 billion. But you don't understand the potential, insisted Edward. That water is worth billions on the international market. Precisely for that reason, responded George. Water is not a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. It is life. Edward, beside himself, finally showed his true face. "You're nothing but an ignorant old man," he shouted. "You have no idea how to handle a fortune like this. You'll waste it on farmer nonsense." Alexander took a threatening step toward Edward. "I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Vance," he said with an icy voice. Edward, realizing he had crossed the line, picked up his jacket. "You'll regret this, Mr. Miller," he threatened before leaving. Nobody rejects Edward Vance. When the door closed behind him, George sighed deeply. "Thank you for the information, young Alexander," he said. "Although I must confess I already suspected something similar." Alexander seemed surprised. "You knew?" George smiled mysteriously. "Jack and I weren't just childhood friends," he explained. "We were partners for decades, though few knew it. While he managed the businesses in the city, I took care of the land and water in Oklahoma." Valerie looked at her grandfather with amazement. "Grandpa, you never told me." "There are many things you don't know about your old grandfather, honey," he responded with a playful smile. "Jack and I discovered that aquifer 15 years ago, but we decided to keep it secret, knowing it would awaken the greed of men like Vance." Alexander nodded with respect. "My great-uncle always said you were more astute than you appeared." "It's not astuteness, boy," corrected George. "It's wisdom. The land teaches it to you if you learn to listen." He rose with some difficulty and walked to the window, contemplating the city. "I've made a decision about the inheritance," he announced. "Valerie, Alexander, I want you to help me implement it." For the next 2 hours, George outlined his plan. The estates and lands would be converted into a protected natural reserve, ensuring that the aquifer could never be commercially exploited. Part of the funds would be allocated to sustainable development projects for local communities, including schools, hospitals, and cultural centers. "Money comes and goes," explained George, "but the land and water are eternal if we take care of them." A week later, at an event that gathered national and international press, George Miller, the humble farmer who had been publicly humiliated by an arrogant businessman, announced the creation of the Montgomery Miller Foundation for Water Conservation. Edward Vance, watching his financial empire crumble, desperately tried to find new investors, but the news of his behavior toward George had spread widely, tarnishing his reputation. Sophie Montgomery, after a long conversation with George, where he revealed unknown stories about the Count's youth, finally understood why her uncle had made that decision. She ended up joining the foundation as Director of Public Relations, rediscovering a purpose that went beyond money and social status. And as for Valerie and Alexander, their collaboration in the foundation brought them closer, discovering that they shared not only a vision of the world, but also feelings that grew day by day. George eventually returned to his adobe house in Oklahoma, rejecting the comforts of mansions and luxury hotels. Each morning, as he contemplated the sunrise over the fields he loved so much, he thought of his friend Jack and smiled. "True wealth, old friend," he murmured to the wind, "was never in the bills or properties. It was always here, in the land, that saw us born and that will welcome us when we depart." In Highland Park, the story of the farmer who refused to sell a natural treasure for a fortune became legend, and every time someone judged another by their appearance or social position, someone remembered the lesson. Sometimes, the one who seems poorest in material things is the richest in wisdom and dignity. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of George and the arrogant businessman has taught you a valuable lesson about true wealth and the importance of not judging by appearances. To continue enjoying equally moving stories, we have prepared a special collection of tales that explore human dignity and the surprises that life has in store for us. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring new stories that, like George's bag, contain unexpected treasures inside. Which of you has lived a situation where you were underestimated? Or perhaps you've judged someone hastily? Tell us your experiences in the comments. Your story could be the next to inspire thousands of people.